morning, rise and shine to the morning momentum, your daily dose of a comprehensive rundown of the top stories making the headlines. This is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. My name is Alfonsoh Ouma. Remember, you can be part of the conversation at Younib_TV on Instagram and Younib Media TV on Facebook. You can also talk to us via our SMS line 0719144144. Let's take a look at the top stories making the headlines this morning. We start with the Standard newspaper. Blow after blow as court serves Ruto beat appeal. Not so fast. The International Criminal Court gave President William Ruto the most favorable ruling in recent times, but he is now forced into reality check by local courts on important decisions made by his government, which citizens feel are unconstitutional. The cases in limbo include housing levy, which was said to be unconstitutional. There's the Maisha number that is said public participation never took place. CAS thrown out, parastatals suspended until next year when case will be heard, and Haiti suspended, matter still in court. Finance Act, parts of it was said to be unconstitutional. And lastly, logging, which was declared null and void. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 4 and page 5 of the Standard this morning. Also, civil matter that sucked in budget boss. Margaret Nyakango, who has been critical of government as controller of budget, found herself in the dock over claims of operating an illegal circle. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 10 and page 11, Kenya seeks 500 billion shillings to plant 15 billion trees rather. More of that story also inside the Standard. On business news, borrowers hit hard with high interest rates. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 18. And on sports news, Junior Stars saunter into finals after beating Tanzania. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 31. Let's take a look at page 2 of the Standard this morning. Puzzle of how controller of budget was linked to 29 million shillings case. In 2021, Mutungi lost a case in which she sought to recover the money from FEP Sacco. Nyakango is said to be one of the 11 directors of FEP Sacco, which the state now says is illegal. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 2 of the Standard this morning. On page 3, prayer warriors charged for failing to pay 371,000 shillings hotel bill. The 3 accused incurred the debt at Goshen Inn Hotel in Eldoret in February. The clerics said they were holed up in the hotel praying for the country to overcome economic challenges, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 3 of the Standard this morning. On page 4, citizens push back against Ruto excesses. Citizen litigations appear to be the thorn in the flesh for Kenya Kwanza government. A series of court rulings have dealt major blows to President's development plan, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 4. At a glance, on March 16th, Ruto nominated 50 CSS for the position. On July 3rd, court has termed the creation of 50 CSS unconstitutional. On November 28th, the housing levy was declared unconstitutional. On July 2nd, Ruto ordered to lifted a 6-year ban on logging. And on October the 12th, the Environment and Lands Court declared the directive null and void. On October 9th, court stopped deployment of police to Haiti. And on October 24th, the orders were extended. On December 4th, court halted the sale of 11 parastatals. On December 5th, High Court slammed the breakers on new generation identification cards, Maisha number. More of that story on page 4. Let's take a look at page 5. Raila Ruto lock horns over 6 billion parties fund. Azimio leader Raila Odinga yesterday opened a legal battle with the Kenya Kwanza administration over political parties fund. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 5. Let's move on to another story. Court slams brakes on Maisha number rollout. Lawyer says the government rolled out the new exercise before appropriate law was enacted. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 5. Let's take a look at page 6. 8.8 billion set aside to equip 70 TVETs. The government has set aside 8.8 billion shillings to support 70 technical and vocational education training institutes across the country with state-of-the-art equipment. Also, another top story, MPs paralyze House to force release of the national government CDF money. Speaker forced to adjourn Tuesday afternoon sittings due to lack of quorum. MPs are expected to break until February next year. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 6 of the Standard this morning. On page 7, top hustler fund borrower gets new 574,000 tuk-tuk. Mr. Kenga said he borrowed 814 times, totaling to 714,000 shillings within a year. CS urges youths to take advantage of the fund to grow their businesses, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 7. Let's take a look at page 8. 4 HIV positive women awarded 3 million shillings each for forced sterilization. Court rules that undergoing bilateral litigation without informed consent was a violation of the women's fundamental rights, including the right to establish a family. Compensation to be paid jointly by Maristops International and the Pumwani Maternity Hospital and the Medicines Sans Frontiers. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 8. Let's take a look at page 9. 53 billion shillings teachers medical cover risks cancellation. MPs investing in the Minute scheme threatened to ask the Treasury to withhold the money. 2 health providers fined 1 million shillings for failure to honor National Assembly sermons, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 9 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 11. Harsh reality at COP28, over $2 trillion finance gap. Economic crisis plunges 54 nations into debt hole. Loss and damage fund attracts pledges totaling to $655 million. That story is beefed up for you on page 11. Let's take a look at the expert opinion this morning on the Standard newspaper. Take allegations of Mungiki sect resurgence with a pinch of salt. Claims of Mungiki sect resurgence by some politicians are chilling. Such allegations hide more than they help to expose nefarious schemes of whatever groups alluded to. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 12. Let's now move on to some other stories inside the Standard this morning on page 16. Blow to security guards as court stops 30,000 salary directive. Private Security Regulatory Authority last month spelled out new pay guidelines. Firms in the North Rift claim the requirement will drive small investors out of business. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 16. Now, the Standard Enterprise, when larger than life CEOs become victims of their own success. You want to catch up with that article inside the Standard. It's all about when larger than life CEOs become victims of their own success. Let's shift gears and take a look at the business news inside the Standard this morning. Job losses rise to a decade high as private sector output falls. Stanbic report attributes massive loss of jobs to weaker sales and a corresponding drop in workloads. Business conditions in the country remained on a steep decline, with firms exhibiting sizable fall in output, in new orders on employment. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 17. In numbers, 70,000 job losses. These are number of Kenyans employed in the formal private sector who had lost jobs in last 1 year due to the rising cost of doing business. Let's take a look at page 18. More pain for borrowers as Central Bank of Kenya moves to rein in living cost crisis. The regulator has raised its benchmark lending rate by a record 200 basis points to 12.5%, signaling an increase in lending rates. Governor Thuge has defended the move, saying it's meant to tame the shilling's freefall which has had a negative ripple effect on the economy. More of that story is augmented for you on page 18 of the Standard. Let's now shift gears and take a look at the international news. We start with the region where political violence is on the rise ahead of South Africa polls. In the past 12 months, more than 20 councillors have been killed. Police say most of the dead councillors were victims of internal policy battles. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 22. In West Africa, Nigeria artist kills worshippers at Nigeria airstrike kills worshippers at festival. At least 85 civilians were killed in Kaduna Estate, northwest Nigeria, in an airstrike during a Muslim religious celebration on Sunday, the local emergency management authority said. Also, let's take a look at Namibia. Anger in Namibia over Dubai COP28 trip by president's children. Some Namibians have been outraged after learning that president's 4 children joined the government's delegation to the COP28 climate summit. They were among 6 of the president's family members listed as part of Namibia's delegation in Dubai. On page 23, you have the Motor Digest article beefed up for you, why Kenya needs vehicle emission laws. You can catch up with that story. Let's now shift gears and take a look at sports news. We start with the Safari Rally. Champ Chaga ready for title defense as EA Classic starts. Stage set for this year's East Africa Safari Rally Classics. Cabra's sugar raising ace will compete against 62 drivers. Let's take a look at golf. Ram signing would be Liv's biggest coup, not since those feverish days in the spring of 2022 when Live Golf first became a thing. Has there been such heightened chatter surrounding potential new recruits for the Saudi Arabia-funded Breakaway League? More of that story on page 29. On page 30, Tergat predicts podium sweep for Kenyans at Paris Olympics. Former world record holder says Kenyans can win all marathon medals. NOC boss foresees Kipyegon becoming a marathon star just like Obiri. And more of that story is beefed up for you on page 30. Let's take a look at page 31. Wanzala the hero as Junior Stars scrapped through into Sekafa final. Kenya will renew their rivalry with Uganda in the finals on Friday. Junior Stars edged Tanzania 4-3 in penalties. More of that story on page 31. Let's take a look at the cover page of the Standard this morning. Ten Hag hoping to get a helping hand from his misfiring stars. Manchester United seeking to hit back as they host Chelsea in the EPL action today. Chelsea were able to fire back against Brighton after a humiliating loss at Newcastle. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 32. With that story of Manchester United, we take a quick break and then we come back with the top stories on the Daily Nation. Don't go away. See you on the other side of this broadcast.
Imagine waking up to a show every morning that entertains, educates,
that keeps you glued to the screen with interesting topics. Talk about health, fashion, business, fitness, and spiritual nourishment. Whether you're enjoying your cup of coffee, tea, milk, amaka uji, Younib Breakfast Show is the place to be. Every Tuesday and Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. with me, Penina Washara, here on Younib TV.
Welcome back to the Morning Momentum. If you're just joining the conversation, you are still rolling with the host with the most. Alfonsoh Ouma is my name. Let's take a look at the top stories inside the Daily Nation this morning. Under siege, Azimio leader Raila Odinga claims case against Dr. Nyakango is politically motivated. Controller of Budget Margaret Nyangate Nyakango is facing a battle to save her job after the state filed 4 fraud-related charges against her, which could set the stage for her removal from office. The charges against Dr. Nyakango, who recently disclosed suspicious inflation of salary budgets, stem from a complaint made against her 9 years ago. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 7. For Amadi, aka Triple A, it's time to rest and recharge. And Atieno Amadi's tenure as Chief Registrar of Judiciary is coming to an end next month. Unlike the handy AAA batteries, she refers to herself as AAA. She has been at the nerve center of judiciary since 2014 and has an insider's account of the happenings over the last decade. More of that story on page 2 and page 3. On COP28, Ruto's call for a global carbon tragedy takes center stage in Dubai. President Ruto's call for a carbon tax has won support as the push to totally phase out fossil fuels intensifies at the World Climate Talks. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Away with the suits, let's go casual, Koskei tells civil servants. Government workers told to dress down and adopt stylish casual wear as Kenya prepares to mark 60th Jamhuri Day fete. That story is beefed up for you on page 13. We now take a look at page 2 of the Daily Nation this morning. Amadi, we can't speed up justice while we are so poorly funded. Now, Ms. Amadi says she is very keen on physically facing in court her accusers in the gold scam case. Now, in a wide-ranging interview, exiting Chief Registrar of the Judiciary Anne Amadi tells Justice Wanga about her experiences with the Chief Justice she has served under and the most important achievement of her 17 years in the corridors of justice. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 2. Let's take a look at page 3. State buys new passport printing machines to set up 4 new centers. The government has purchased 2 passport printing machines with capacity to produce 3,500 passports per day. Let's take a look at page 4. CBK shocks borrowers with the highest rate in 11 years. The commercial banks' weighted average interest rates rose to 13.98%. Monetary Policy Committee raised the CBK rate to 12.5% from 10.5%. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 5, MPs paralyzed sitting over national government CDF delay. The CDF cash is used to provide bursaries to learners as well as fund other projects in constituencies. Lawmakers say constituencies have not received any money since Parliament passed the budget in June. That story is beefed up for you on page 5. Let's take a look at page 6. Mazayo moves to court over 50 shillings e-citizen convenience fee. Court told money is paid to a private entity as evidenced by the issuance of 2 separate invoices. Kilifi Senator argues that the charge is an illegal tax imposed on all persons seeking government services. That story is beefed up for you on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 7, charged with fraud, Nyakango faces battle for her job. Controller of Budget recently told MPs that budget for her salary had been inflated by more than 3 times. Mr. Odinga says the charges against Controller of Budget are politically motivated. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 7. Let's take a look at page 8. Ruto's call for global carbon treaty takes center stage. Colombia becomes 11th country in world to commit the fossil treaty. Speakers at World Climate Summit agree it is an important step towards phasing out fossil fuels. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 8 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on to some other stories on page 12. How Homa Bay is using hotline WhatsApp chatbot to fight gender-based violence. Residents, especially gender violence survivors, can now report cases for action without their identities being disclosed. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 12 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 13. MPs threaten to hold 17 billion shillings payment for teachers' cover. Minute officials failed to show up for second meeting with Education Committee. Lawmakers probe complaints. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 13. On page 14, it's all about Child Welfare Society of Kenya. It's beefed up for you on page 13, 14, and 15. Let's now shift gears and take a look at the expert opinion this morning. Why privatization plan stings. The trends seem to suggest that we are beginning to cede the lead to our neighbors in a number of areas. Those are sentiments by Jaindi Kisero, who is an economist. You can catch up with more of that story on page 17. Moving on swiftly to other stories, let's take a look at page 25. It's the DN2 motoring article, the brand new modern pickup. It's all about the Ford Ranger. You can take a look at that if you are a motoring enthusiast. Let's move on to county news inside the Daily Nation this morning. EACC out to reclaim prime land grabbed in Kisumu. The regional manager says they are following several cases being processed in court. Environment Court orders demolition of upmarket apartments. That story is beefed up for you on page 26. Briefly, in Nairobi County, woman stabbed and dies in South B. In Mombasa County, court rules county to pay farm 53 million shillings. Let's take a look at Lamu. Garsen Witu Road closed over floods. The Kenya National Highways Authority has closed the Garsen Witu Lamu Road following flooding in the area after River Tana burst its banks due to heavy rains. That story is beefed up for you on page 26. On page 27 in Nyeri County, queries over payment of staff older than 60 years. Senators also concerned about lack of ethnic balance in the devolved unit. In Kiambu County, farmers get milk processing equipment. The county government has donated milk processing equipment worth over 25 million shillings to a number of dairy cooperative societies as part of its strategy to drive value addition in the sub-sector. Let's move on swiftly to other stories inside the Daily Nation this morning. And that lands us to page 32, where we take a look at the international news. Now, UK minister heads to Rwanda in asylum deal. The government has not provided the cost for the scheme. Some 63,852 migrants have crossed the channel in 1 year alone. You can catch up with more of that story on page 32. In Uganda to continue pursuing rebels in the DRC. Uganda's military says the withdrawal of the East African Region Force from the Democratic Republic of Congo will not affect the joint operations against Allied Democratic Forces rebel group between Kampala and Kinshasa. Let's now take a look at the UN. Gaza safe zones can't be created. The United Nations says it is impossible to create safe zones for civilians to flee in the Gaza Strip amid a bombing campaign by Israel. That story is beefed up for you on page 33. Leopard tanks fail to help Ukraine capture territory. Advanced vehicle now being used to hit infantry groups and ammunition depots. Media said the army lost around 12 tanks in the stalled counter-offensive. That story is beefed up for you on page 33. Let's take a look at page 34, business news. Now, NHC now eyes student hostels in revenue plan. Kenya's shortage of affordable units rising by the day. Also, KenGen to build second largest wind power plant in Marsabit. KenGen will develop the second biggest wind power plant in Kenya with an initial capacity of 200 megawatts as the firm spearheads the country efforts to fully greening the national grid in 7 years. That story is beefed up for you on page 34. Briefly, in the transport sector, Basic Go set 766 million shillings to drive growth. In acquisition, Propaco buys 2.1 billion shillings stake in Harleys, and competition over 23 small farms marked for funding. You want to catch up with more of those business news on page 34. Let's now shift gears and take a look at the sports news. Inside the Daily Nation this morning, we start with tennis. Okutoi eyes more glory in Nairobi tournament. US-based Kenyan star determined to cause an upset. Two city competitors have attracted 45 players from 34 countries. That story is beefed up for you on page 44. On page 45, new African Football League set to transform face of continent's game. Now, the prize money and the perks that come with participating are massive. Those are sentiments by Gilbert Wandera. East African Safari Rally Classic Rally, more than motorsport. The classic is rated higher than renowned events with a rich heritage. You want to catch up with that on page 45. On page 46, Junior Stars silence Tanzania starlets deemed in Gaborone. Song and dance moments after fiercely contested Sekafa under 18 championship semi-final watched by over 20,000 at Kisumu's Jomo Kenyatta Stadium, but mood in Gaborone gloomy. That story is beefed up for you on page 46 and page 47. Also, Pep predicts City will win Premiership. Now, a bullish Pep Guardiola says he believes Manchester City will win a record fourth consecutive Premier League league title despite a 3-match winless run. Now, let's take a look at the English Premier League. Ten Hag says he enjoys player backing. Red Devils ban 4 media outlets before press conference. That story is beefed up for you on page 47. On the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning, how new health laws will change fees and referrals. Now, the newly enacted laws were suspended by the court last week. Amounts to be paid for health services in public and private hospitals to be set by authority. Ruto holds talks with Indian leaders in state visit. That story on the cover page. Lastly, state suffers another blow as court blocks Maisha number rollout. The High Court yesterday halted the government's plan to roll out the new digital identity card dubbed Maisha number after the process was challenged over lack of data protection, impact assessment, and meaningful public participation before implementation. More of that story is beefed up for you on the cover page. Now, with that story of the Maisha number rollout, we come to an end of today's session of the Morning Momentum. Many thanks for choosing to stay with Younib TV, and by extension, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all those who made this broadcast a success. To begin with, you, our audience, and right here back in studio, the Chief Controller, Anifa Kavira. I have been your host, Alfonsoh Ouma. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful Wednesday. Bye-bye.